Hare Krishna. So this is the Krishna Fest, July 19th, Sunday. And we're going to be speaking tonight, as advertised, on the fall and redemption of the soul. So we'll begin with a verse from the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, chapter 20 of the Madhya Lila, text 117, where Lord Chaitanya is speaking to Sanatana Goswami. Sanatana Goswami has just surrendered and prayed for guidance to Lord Chaitanya as his spiritual master. And Lord Chaitanya is instructing him. And so right near the beginning of his instructions, he gives this verse. This is Bengali, chapter 20, text 117 of the Madhya Lila. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, since we're speaking on the fall and redemption of the soul, this is the one of the verses that explain how the fall takes place. And Lord Chaitanya says, Krishna buli se jeev anadi bahir mukha, ateva maya tare deha sangsara dukkha. Translation: forgetting Krishna, the living entity has been attracted by the external feature from time immemorial. Therefore, the illusory energy, or maya, gives him all kinds of misery in his material existence. Purport: when the living entity forgets his constitutional position as an eternal servant of Krishna, he is immediately entrapped by the illusory external energy. The living entity is originally part and parcel of Krishna and is therefore the superior energy of Krishna. He is endowed with inconceivable minute energy that works inconceivably within the body. However, the living entity, forgetting his position, is situated in material energy. The living entity is called the marginal energy because by nature he is spiritual, but by forgetfulness he is situated in the material energy. Thus he has the power to live either in the material energy or in the spiritual energy, and for this reason he is called marginal energy. Being in the marginal position, he is sometimes attracted by the external illusory energy, and this is the beginning of his material life. When he enters the material energy, he is subjected to the threefold time measurement: past, present, and future. Past, present, and future belong only to the material world, and they do not exist in the spiritual world. The living entity is eternal, and he existed before the creation of this material world. Unfortunately, he has forgotten his relationship with Krishna. The living entity's forgetfulness is described herein as anadi, which indicates that it has existed since time immemorial. One should understand that due to his desire to enjoy himself in competition with Krishna, the living entity comes into material existence. So before we proceed, Prabhu, can you get me one of those things in the corner there? Maybe the blue one. Thank you. That's good. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I forgot to bring my little cushion. Yeah, that's better. Okay. Hare Krishna. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chukshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So, I wrote a little poem describing the fall and redemption of the soul, and I'd like to just share it with you now. And then we can discuss in terms of what Srila Prabhupada wrote here and other places of this very important subject of how we got here from the spiritual world and how we can return. So this is called the fall and redemption of the soul, where Krishna lives, felicity abounds, with pure simplicity and loving sensibility, all serve him with humility. But when a living entity rejects his true identity, and out of sheer stupidity surrenders to cupidity, he loses all sagacity and with it all capacity to understand reality or curb his sensuality. Abandoning humility, he touts his own ability, forgetting his fragility and fortune's volatility. Immersed in asininity for what seems an infinity of lives devoid of piety, he suffers in anxiety till contact with God's devotee, perhaps of utmost brevity, awakens his affinity for words of the divinity. Perceiving the futility of all his imbecility, the soul regains his sanity and casts away his vanity. Endowed with new humility, he serves with all ability and growing spontaneity his guru and the deity. Regaining his identity, the wayward living entity returns to the fraternity of Krishna for eternity. So let's go through this little ditty that I wrote and explore some of the points. So the first thing is that where Krishna lives, felicity abounds. There are so many wonderful descriptions of the spiritual world. Specifically, I'm thinking of the Brahma Samhita, where Lord Brahma describes Goloka Vrindavan, Shriya Kanta Padamapurusha Kalpadaravo. He says, in that spiritual world, there are countless Lakshmis, goddesses of fortune. They're all beloveds of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Kanta Padamapurusha Kalpadaravo Druma. All the trees there are desire trees. Here we have trees, many trees don't produce any fruit or flowers, or simple flowers maybe. But if they do produce a fruit, it'll be just one kind of fruit in season. But in the spiritual world, you have these kalpa vriksha, desire trees. In any season, you can get any fruit and offer it to Krishna. Everything is super conscious. There's nothing like we find here with trees who stand for 100 and 200 years, but they really have very, very little consciousness. But there, everything is completely conscious. And every step is a dance, every word is a song. One can always hear Krishna's dear flute playing in the background. And every thing is glowing with this Chidananda potency, this blissful spiritual potency that one can immediately taste. And of course, there's countless Surabhi cows that can give as much milk as you want. So this is a place completely hidden from us here. We can have no idea with our present senses. But this is revealed in the revealed scriptures, such as Brahma Samhita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita. This describes. So felicity abounds. That's our natural home. And there are countless living entities who stay there and engage in their loving relations with Krishna, reciprocating in bhakti and pure love, and never come here. But some of us, there with pure simplicity and loving sensibility, serving with humility. But some of us have rejected that world because we have minute independence. This principle is very important to understand. Because we're part and parcel of God, we have His qualities to minute degree. Of course, the quantity is, we're infinitesimal and Krishna is infinite. But the quality is the same. Just as the drop of water in the Pacific Ocean, every drop has a little chemical to a minute degree. It's a little salty and has other chemicals. So we have Krishna's, He's supremely independent, we're minutely independent. If we weren't independent, then it would mean, the idea of freely giving love and loving service to Krishna would have no meaning. So Krishna has emanated us from this marginal energy. We belong to the spiritual energy as described in that purport. But we've lost our spiritual nature because we're identifying with the material world. So when a living entity rejects his true identity, our true identity is spoken of, that's the first answer to the first question of Sanatana Goswami. Who am I? What am I really? And Lord Chaitanya says, Jivera, well, jivas, or jiva souls, Swarup Hoy Krishnera Nityadas. Every living entity, not just human in human form, but all the countless living entities and the other species of life, they are also innately, inherently servants of Krishna, loving servants. But we've forgotten that. We've lost it, and we're identifying with whatever body we happen to be in. So when we reject our true identity And out of sheer stupidity, out of ignorance, we surrender to cupidity. Cupidity here means our desire to enjoy separately from Krishna, which means what we call sense gratification. Then we lose our sagacity. As Krishna describes in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, this material desire, known as kama, covers our real knowledge. Avritam jnanametena jnanino nityavaidina. We are known as a jnanina. We are knowledgeable, living entities full of understanding. But that's covered to a great degree by material desire. We can close that too. It's too noisy. Okay. So therefore we lose our ability to understand reality or curb our sensuality. We're controlled by these material desires. And so then we begin our sojourn in the material world, from body to body, situation to situation, without a clue of who we actually are, identifying with whatever body we happen to be occupying at the particular time. That's the first lesson of Bhagavad Gita. We are eternal. The body is obviously temporary. We were never born, we'll never die. Jayate minete vakadachan. That means that we occupy many, many different bodies according to our activities, according to our consciousness that we cultivate as human beings. So this is we surrender to cupidity, material desire. We lose our knowledge, and with that loss of knowledge or ignorance, we no longer have the capacity to understand who we are, reality, or curb sensuality. We're just like being led around by these myriad desires and ideas that we develop in contact with this material world through what is called the modes of nature. So instead of humility, remember that this is one of the characteristics in the spiritual world. Everyone knows his place. We all are dependent on Krishna. We're servants of Krishna and in various varieties of relationships with Krishna, but all on the basis of understanding he is the master, he is the enjoyer, he's the supreme, and we're servants. And we're happy in that relationship, ever-expanding bliss. But out of stupidity, we rejected it. So, we abandon that humility, and we think that we're very strong and powerful and independent. We tout our own ability, means praise. And we forget how fragile we are. I was just reading the 2nd canto, the very beginning. There's a wonderful lesson there from Shukadeva's teaching Pariksit, beginning of his instructions. And he praises the question that Shukadeva asks, what should one do when one is about to die? What should he hear? How should he direct his mind? It's a critical time. And Shukadeva praises the question. Oh, what a wonderful question. The question and the answer to this question are beneficial for all humanity, you see. But for those who are not interested in this subject, there are millions of subject matters for hearing and inquiry. And such conditioned souls, at night they simply sleep and have sex. During the day they make money. The weekend they shop to support their family and maintain. And then they have various fallible soldiers. In other words, we try to defend ourselves against the onslaught of the material nature, which has so many weapons against us. What they call the threefold miseries. These are things just like we have this pandemic coming that is affecting everyone in the world. Even if not directly, there's the fear that it will come and so forth. That in itself is a misery. So who saw this coming? Practically nobody. Certainly not here in the Western world. But it's here. It's one of the threefold miseries. What would it be? Adi Bhautik, other living beings giving us misery. But these viruses aren't even alive. So it's like a natural disturbance. Whatever it is, it's out of our control. So we're fragile. We're walking around in these bodies and we're on the illusion that everything is okay. But the body is just a very delicate machine. And we need shelter. We should understand we need shelter. And we should call out to the source of all the real shelter, which is God. But instead, we rely on the strength of our body, of our bank account, of our associates, of our family, life insurance, all of these different things, which are all fallible also. So that's what this means. Forgetting our fragility and fortune's volatility. Volatility means here today, gone tomorrow. We try to gather some money and put it away, but then some medical thing happens and it all goes out, or we get robbed, or the money is no longer worth what it was. A million different ways. where your fortunes can change overnight or even instantaneously. So this is the nature of this material world, is that it's constantly changing. It's called Bhavasagara, the ocean of change. That's what Bhavasagara means. And the main changes are these four changes: birth, old age, disease, and death. And it's been going round and around since time immemorial. So then the next verse says, immersed in asininity. In other words, the ignorance is so thick. In the human form of life we have a chance, but even there, we're not seeking out real knowledge. So we have like many, countless births in so many different species. We've been wandering around, suffering, dying, taking rebirth, and going through all of these changes, far from our home in Goloka Vrindavan. So that's why it says, immersed in asininity or ignorance, for what seems an infinity of lives devoid of piety, we suffer in anxiety. So this is a little painting of material life. Then comes the saving grace, contact with God's devotee. Perhaps of utmost brevity. There's a verse describing, there's a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam. It appears 3 times in the Bhagavatam. Once with a slightly different first line, it means the same thing. Tuliyama lavenapi. We just had this verse in the class. Tuliyama lavenapi naswargam napurnarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kimutashishaha. Which means the association with an associate of the Lord. Bhagavat sangi. Bhagavat sangi means someone who is intimately understands and his relationship with God, and is with God at every moment of his life. That's a Bhagavat sangi. So a sangasya, association with such an intimate associate of God, is so valuable that it can't even be compared with going to the heavenly planets and enjoying an Indraloka for millions of years. Even liberation is not even one moment's association. Lavenapi means the slightest time frame you can imagine. Shri Shri Gauranga ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Giridhari ki jai, Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra ji ki jai. So even a moment's association, a half a moment, with a genuine pure devotee of the Lord is so valuable that it cannot be compared with these usually valuable things, which are life in Indraloka for millions of years, enjoying like anything, liberation. What to speak of mundane things people aspire for, like money, wealth, fame in this world? You can't be compared. Why is that? Because by that moment's association, you can get the seed of bhakti planted in your heart. This is part of Lord Chaitanya's teachings to Rupa Goswami. He describes the great fortune of someone who's wandering up and down the different species of different planets and down to Patala Loka. And finally, by the grace of Krishna, he meets the Guru who gives him the seed of bhakti that he can plant in his heart. And then that creeper of bhakti grows. So by the grace of Krishna, you get Guru. By the grace of Guru, you get Krishna. So, but the key is that you meet someone who is in touch with God, who can give you the clue of this whole other world that you've left millions and millions of years ago. Contact with God's devotee, perhaps of utmost brevity. That's a lavenapi, even a tenth or 100th of a second, can awaken our affinity for words of the divinity. This is the key, is that we become interested in the human form of life. The lower forms can't understand anything. In the human form of life, we become interested in the words that describe this whole other reality and give us a clue that how we can escape from our dilemma, our imprisonment in this material world, and return to the divine world, back to Godhead. So by that affinity, if we're fortunate to water that seed by coming into the association of devotees, then we perceive the futility of all our imbecility. In other words, all of our efforts to be happy and secure in this world are futile and hopeless. And so we become receptive. We become receptive to the message of Godhead as given in the modern age in the books of Srila Prabhupada, who understood all of these points, and that he was deputed. He was instructed by a spiritual master and given the mission by Lord Chaitanya to try to spread this wonderful knowledge and the method of specifically in this age chanting the holy name beyond the shores of India. You know, it was already known there, but he had some success, but not enough in preaching in English, which was what his spiritual master told him to do in India. So in the last part of his life, he decided to go for broke and try to start a worldwide movement at age 69 in a foreign country with no money and no followers. You know, in other words, materially it was hopeless. But because he felt the empowerment of the order of his guru, Lord Chaitanya, Krishna, and he said, well, this is, he just threw himself on the hands of Krishna, and Krishna, it's up to you to make my words suitable. So, and he was able to do the most amazing thing of starting this worldwide movement and writing all his books that give instruction. And if someone takes advantage of those gifts, then we can return to Godhead. So the result here, that if one is fortunate enough to come into the association and begin to practice the principles of devotional service, beginning with chanting the holy name and giving up the force and sinful activities of meat eating, intoxication, illicit sex, and gambling, then we regain our sanity, because really it's kind of insane what material life. Lord Rishabdev, who's Krishna himself, he gives his imprimatur, Nunam pramatta kurote vikarma yadindriya pritiya apranoti. Indriya priti is sense gratification. It is the pursuit of lusty desires and an attempt to be happy, but it just leads to misery after misery, which is what Rishabdev says in this verse. So he says, endowed with new humility, which we lost when we left the spiritual world, we serve with all ability, our growing spontaneity, the guru and the deity. So there's a lot in this little verse, of course. It's kind of a sutra form. So this idea of service, we are by nature servants. This is our dharma. This is our nature as living entities. Remember that Lord Chaitanya described, or Prabhupada described in that purport, which is the same teachings Lord Chaitanya early gave, the actual nature of the soul in this marginal position. We have to understand that God has numerous energies, different kinds of energies, and they fall into three main categories: the internal, the external, and the marginal. The internal energy is that spiritual world I was describing, where everything is alive, everything is conscious, and it is the phrase Satchidananda can summarize it. Everything is eternal, full of consciousness, and full of bliss. And just contrast it with this world. Where's the bliss? You got COVID-19. How can you have a world of bliss when you have that pandemic going on? It's just the opposite. Everything is temporary, it's full of ignorance and full of misery. So, by opening ourselves up to the teachings of the Shastra, the scripture that Srila Prabhupada has translated, we begin to regain our true nature. So we're in the middle. We're in this marginal position. Here's the spiritual world, full of bliss and knowledge. Here's the material world, which is full of ignorance and misery. And we are marginal, meaning that we can either be influenced by the internal energy or by the external energy. We can turn our attention toward Krishna and his service and stay there, or because of our independence, minute independence, we can withdraw our attention and our affection for Krishna and turn it to this material energy. And that's what we've done. And so, but now we're endowed with new humility, realizing that we need to regain our service attitude toward God. And that's what Bhakti is all about, training us, and with the great opportunity and the gift of the holy name, simply by chanting the holy name, even without full devotion or even full attention, one makes tremendous advancement toward the spiritual identity, our original identity, regaining it. And if we follow the principles and association and we're careful in our sadhana or practice, then we can get growing spontaneity. What is it as austerity at first? Because it's unnatural, we're so habituated or conditioned, as Prabhupada said, to rejecting Krishna and trying to serve our material desires in relation to this material energy. So it requires training and it requires effort to regain our original nature. It's just like if you have an accident and you can't walk for some time, then your muscles atrophy. And even if the cast comes off, say, you still need some physical therapy in order to be able to get back to normal, isn't it? Even though you may know, you remember, how you're supposed to be able to act with your limbs, it doesn't happen automatically. So, but if we stay with it, then we serve with all ability and growing spontaneity, because it's natural. It's natural to be a servant of Krishna and God. And Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, there's so many people who he affects who are converted to Krishna Bhakti in association with Lord Chaitanya. And they become completely transformed. We have the perfect example of Nityananda, how he persisted in saving, at making the effort to save these rascals, who were rascals, Jagai and Madhai. Born in Brahmin families, they were right in Navadvip, but they lost their Brahminical qualities. They became dacoits and drunkards and rapists and everything else. And Lord, not just sense, these are perfect examples of Kali Yugites. Now, if I can get them to surrender to Lord Chaitanya, this will be a great feather in his cap, so to speak. In other words, this will be a perfect example of his mercy. So despite having being injured, being insulted, he persisted in trying to save them. And they eventually surrendered, and they became great devotees from that. So that transformation is possible because that's our natural or original nature, is to surrender to the Lord. So therefore it says, regaining his identity, the wayward living entity returns to the fraternity of Krishna for eternity. So this famous phrase Prabhupada made famous, going back home, back to Godhead. He called his magazine Back to Godhead. And you may not know this, but this is partially inspired. Prabhupada started this magazine in 1944 in the middle of World War II. And India was very much part of it because it was part of the British Empire. That's why you hear how there was bombing in Calcutta. Well, who was bombing it? Japan. They're part of the Axis, and India was part of the Allies. So, 1944, he starts the magazine. And he has many articles in there from prominent people. And one of them was from some English gentleman who was saying that the only hope for humanity is back to God, is to go back to God. And I think probably picked up this back to Godhead. So, what is that back to Godhead? First of all, the implication is, as Lord Chaitanya says, as Prabhupada explains in this purport we read, that's where we came from. And that's where our natural position is. And even in this material world, because it's not some physical place, a geographical place we're going to. It's a different state of consciousness. And so even in this material world, if one is seriously practicing bhakti, you can feel the presence of God more and more in your life, and you can see everything in terms of God's energy. So everything reminds you of Krishna. Wouldn't that be nice? Your every breath reminds you of Krishna. We're trying to attain this constant remembrance of Krishna. So this going back to Godhead is really the goal. That's the goal we're striving for. And the process of achieving the goal is what Srila Prabhupada has painstakingly given us, and which has been formulated by Lord Chaitanya, especially his followers, such as Rupa Goswami, give it in such a very systematic way in the book Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which Srila Prabhupada gave us as the nectar of devotion. So many do's and don'ts. It's just like any other process. If you want to learn to play a musical instrument, I remember when I was a kid, in grade school, we didn't have much money. We had no piano at home, So whatever instruments they had for free, they were given to teach you, then we had to choose from. So it was either going to be the violin, the trumpet, or the clarinet. That's what they had available. Well, I wasn't going to play the trumpet. It was too hard to blow, and the violin seemed like a sissy instrument to me, so I wasn't going to play. So I said, okay, I'll play the clarinet. So I started playing the clarinet, and I had to practice in a separate room, because it didn't sound like much. But somehow, if you keep working at it, and of course I had some lessons, gradually it sounds a little bit like music, and if you have some affinity for that, then you eventually learn to play an instrument, whether it's a drum or the piano or the harmonium or anything. So the same thing is true for bhakti. You can only play because there's some musical nature there, and that you're drawing out, that is naturally there. But we all have, every one of us, every soul is by constitution a servant of Krishna. That's the verse. Jivera swarupoi Krishnera nityadas. So that nityadas means eternally we're servants of Krishna. But now we've become servants of so many other things. Our lusty desires, our senses, wife, family, this or that, the boss, very much, the tax man. We have to serve because that's our nature. So that serving propensity, by training, we can learn how to redirect toward Krishna, his devotees. And that really makes us happy. And it's a spiritual happiness. It's not dependent on any material condition. We read so much about Lord Chaitanya's followers, great followers like the six Goswamis, Haridas Thakur. Materially, they had practically nothing at all. Not even what we consider the necessities of life. They hardly ate. They had no homes. I'm thinking the six Goswamis, they're living under a tree, they're here and there, And so, you think, oh yeah, we have that, we have the homeless. No, it's a world of difference. The whole thing is in the consciousness. These are such exalted souls, highly learned, but they gave up voluntarily all their opulence, to become wandering mendicants in Vrindavan, which some people think, well, this is just some forest somewhere. What are you going to do? But no, it's a specific forest where Krishna engaged in his pastimes thousands of years earlier. So it has a special significance, and they've found so many places they were able to discover where Krishna had his Leela. So they made it into a place of pilgrimage, which, 450 years later, people are going there, and there's so many temples, Plus most importantly, they wrote books, which Srila Prabhupada used as a basis of his movement, specifically Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita that he used before it's all based on these great souls. So materially they had practically nothing, but spiritually they had everything. There's a beautiful verse describing that, some of you are familiar with, the Srinivasacharya's writings about the six Goswamis, his Ashtaka, and Goswami Ashtaka. So the fourth verse is Chaktva Turna Mashesha Mandala Pati Shading Sada Tuchavat Bhutva Dina Ganeshako Kodonaya Kopina Kantashito. So he says, especially three of them had tremendous wealth and influence. Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and Raghunath Das Goswami. They were like you would find multi-millionaires or even billionaires today. Two of them were part of the government. One was the sole heir to a vast fortune, Raghunath Das Goswami. So what does it say? Tyaktva Turnam. This is after they met Lord Chaitanya, and got inspired by his movement of back to Godhead. So Tyaktva Turnam, they immediately gave it all up. Ashesha Mandalapati, endless influence and wealth, as Tuchavat. They gave it all up as insignificant. And what did they do? Bhutva Dina Ganeshako, Karunaya Kopina Kantashito. They went to Vrindavan and put on a simple loincloth, in order to help the people. In other words, for the benefit of those who would follow him, namely us. Dina are the fallen, the neglected, the fallen souls like us. Ganeshako, Karunaya, out of compassion they did this. So what was their consciousness? What was their experience? Yes, they had practically nothing materially. Not, even to the point of hardly eating or having a home, a roof over their head. They would live under a tree, But were they miserable? Were they anxiety? Were they looking for some bottle of wine somewhere? Heck no. They were Gopi Bhavada Samritabdala Hali Kalalorla Magno Mahor. They were experiencing again and again the highest levels of ecstatic bliss in relationship by experiencing the Gopi's love for Krishna, which is the highest and most intense standard of love for God. So this is inspires us. And when Srila Prabhupada started his movement, he also insisted on this simple living, high thinking principle. And so he insisted, if you're going to be my disciple or live in the temple, you have to follow these rules and regulations, give up this illicit sex and night meeting and so forth. And he gave us the process of getting the spiritual strength to do it. Mainly a lot of chanting of Hare Krishna. This Hare Krishna chanting is the Yuga Dharma. It's the process for the age. And he would teach us this verse. We used to sing it on Harinam. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam. Kalo nasteva, 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 gatiranyata. If you want to achieve the supreme goal of life in this age, when dissension and chaos abound, there is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way that can ever be found. But to chant Krishna's name, but to chant Krishna's name, but to chant Krishna's name with a stout-hearted vow, and to pray, O Lord Krishna, O friend of the poor, let my head ever unto your lotus feet bow. So that last couple of lines embodies the Trinada Bhisuni Chaina verse. How to chant successfully. I mean, chanting itself is glorious from beginning to end. Everyone should chant as much as possible. But there are certain processes or cultivation of certain attitudes that help us to advance to the real goal of the chanting, which is love of Godhead. And one of the most important is this sense of humility, remember? Endowed with new humility. So Lord Chaitanya has taught us in his Shikshastika. He didn't write so much, but he wrote these 8 verses, which are the foundation of everything. And so, okay, chanting is the process. He describes in the first verse of this Shikshastika that with 7 metaphors, he describes the benefits of the chanting. All the way from cleansing the heart, regaining our natural knowledge of spirit, and expanding the ocean of bliss, tasting bliss at every moment, and going back to Godhead. But how to chant successfully, you see? How to get attraction for the chanting. Otherwise we can take it as some hobby and give it up, or not become serious. So he said, one has to be very, very humble and realize that we need help. We need the shelter of Krishna and call out from the bottom of your heart that to be as humble as a blade of grass and tolerant as a tree, because look at this world. At any time, your life is in danger. So at every moment, we have to feel that and call out to Krishna with deep desperation. And don't want any honor, and give honor to others who deserve it. In this way you can chant constantly. So by doing this, we want to regain our identity. Each of us has an eternal relationship with Krishna that we've forgotten. That's called our Swarup. And so real mukti is not just getting free of birth and death. That's a negative view. Mukti hit vanyata rupam swarupena vivastati. This is the Bhagavat understanding of real mukti. It means giving up our identification with all these other forms we've had. Even in this one lifetime, we go through so many bodies, so many different identities. Little baby body, adolescent body, old man body like me. You think, if you identify with it, you're in ignorance. So it says, give it up. Mukti hit vanyata rupam swarupena vivastati. And as we heard at the beginning, what is our swarup? Eternal servant of Krishna. So that's what real mukti means. So then we can become more and more spontaneously attracted to thinking of Krishna, glorifying Krishna, serving God, serving our spiritual master, and we regain our real identity. And then we return to the fraternity of Krishna, the place of loving exchange in the spiritual world. So this is the redemption of the soul. There's no other redemption. There's no way of adjusting this material world where there'll be happiness and security and peace and prosperity. There's always going to be conflict, always going to be threats, personally, collectively. And the only solution is to develop our devotional service, our bhakti for Krishna, which is natural for us. And we've been given the means, we've been given the environment. Srila Prabhupada worked so hard to establish these temples, ashrams, and everyone here, through the internet, can take the process very seriously and begin or go further along on this path back to Godhead and come out of our fallen condition. That's the solution for the fallen redemption of the soul. We need redeeming. Okay. Now I don't think we have a means of getting any questions from outside, do we? A comment. Let's hear it. You can take the mask off temporarily. Hey, where's the mic? Use the mic. Bluebeard. Isn't there some? Uh-oh. Is there a glitch? I don't hear anything. Okay, you're on.
Hare Krishna, David Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances to you. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Wonderful class. I like that everything reminds of Krishna. Thank you. Dhanabari Dasi.
What's the name?
Dhanabari Dasi.
Dhanabari. She's always very polite. Can you, after the class, think about that mic? Because that has some static in it. The other person. Yeah. We have two mics, A and B. And A is that one. This is B, which is better. All right, we have a couple of minutes.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Boo.
Sorry. So, on this, from the fall of the soul to the path of redemption of the soul, sometimes after we take to the process of Bhakti Yoga, at times we feel, or speaking for myself anyway, we may feel more inclined, and at times we may feel less inclined. You know, like sometimes we may be more inspired to really get the gears grinding, and other times we just feel, it's kind of like a swinging pendulum. But so how do we, I guess, kind of slow the momentum of this pendulum swinging and just stay steady on the...
There's a wonderful book called the Madhurya Kadambini. Have you ever heard of it? Yeah. The Madhurya Kadambini by Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur. He talks directly to the difficulties of the sadhaka, waning enthusiasm, doubts, difficulties controlling this or getting enthusiasm for that. And so it's a struggle. We have to see the overall picture, how we're all coming from different states of conditioning, different varieties of conditioning, different depths of the modes of nature, combinations. So it requires determination, and as we know, patience, but also to maintain our enthusiasm. What you're talking about is the waxing and waning of enthusiasm, and there's no one size fits all. But I'll tell you one thing is that the key element to maintaining enthusiasm is the quality of the chanting, and not just in japa but also in kirtan, is being there, and the simplest thing is to hear, to really focus on hearing the holy name, whether you're in japa or in kirtan, and it helps. This is in that book by Bhaktivedanta Swami, the Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava biography, massive book. There's one section there about the need for glorifying the holy name, having a regular glorification of the holy name, because anything you glorify regularly, if you're glorifying it or you're around people who glorify it, then you start to gain appreciation. In those days, when we used to have big sporting events, you remember, and thousands of people in the stadiums and things like that. So what's going on there? Someone moves to a new city and then he's introduced to a new team, But if you go to that, if you have some, desire and you have some affinity, then before long you're, rooting for the new team. You've gotten the sound, the enthusiasm, the emotion of those around you has affected you, and you're now part of the fan club. You know what I'm saying? So we have the same thing. We're Krishna's fan club, and it's the most wholesome relationship there is. It never ends. But we're not really committed fans yet. In other words, we know there's different levels of enthusiasm and devotion because there's different levels of purity. So wanting to develop that, this is the first thing. Intellectually, we know that it all depends on our developing attachment for hearing and chanting and moving forward, and enthusiasm, deepening enthusiasm. So therefore, the association with the enthusiastic and our determination to glorify and praise the holy name and read the books of Srila Prabhupada. This is why having some venue for preaching is so important. It's so difficult now because we're cut off. But if we can find somehow we can contribute directly to bringing someone else along in devotional service. That's why being together, having association is so important. This helps tremendously. Prabhupada knew that. And so from the beginning, he gave the BTG. As soon as he could print the BTG, he had to, and then they would write their own articles. This is for his students to write it. He would have his article there. But that really helps sustain. People are thinking about it and giving it and getting the mercy of Krishna from within when you're trying to give it to others. So these are ways to maintain the enthusiasm. Finding a service that we like, that we can perfect, and also having a way in which we can share Krishna consciousness with others, especially new people, but even with each other, somehow or other, glorifying. That's why I always like to stress, my specialty of the shlokas, because there's a perfect way of sharing Krishna consciousness with others, and there's so much aesthetics involved, beautiful ways of speaking. My little attempts at poetry, forgive me, but there, people appreciate. That I can get into that, So it's not one size fits all again, but the process itself, if we stick with it, we'll get over that period of waxing and waning enthusiasm. We'll have more steadiness in everything, and we'll be more secure in our devotional service and confident. So it's an ongoing process, but it works. At a certain point, get committed, and it helps when you get initiated. That's an important step of commitment. Okay, it's almost 7:30. I did come late. I'm sorry, but let me share one other poem with you. This is let's see. Okay, this is a little poem. Srimad Bhagavatam is filled with beautiful descriptions of Krishna, and some of them in the 10th canto we find are especially attractive. So this is the beginning of a chapter called the Venu Gita. Venu Gita means the song of the flute, because that's featured. And the gopis are singing of Krishna in the forest. They're at home. They're in separation. They're seeing him through their mind's eye, spiritual eyes. And so this is the very beginning, describing this beautiful scene in the forest right after the rainy season in the autumn. So everything is very lush. And then the gopis see Krishna go into the forest, and they describe him. And then the chapter goes on with their songs, but this is a wonderful little introduction. So I'll share some of this beautiful Sanskrit with you. Kusamata Banadada Shishmibringa, Twitukulagushta Saraksarin Mahidram, Modapata the Vagaya Chariyunga Sahapasapar Balashtakujavenam, Barhapidam Natabadavapukarnayo Karnikaram, Bimbran Vasak Kanakapisham by Jayanting Chamalam, Randranve no Hadadasudayapur Ian Gopa Vrindar, Vrindaranyam Sopatanamanam Pravishad, Gita Kirtihi. Vrindavan's rivers, lakes, and hills ring out with charming hums and trills as flocks of birds and maddened bees rejoice among the flowering trees. To those idyllic woods and glens repairs Govinda with his friends, Sri Rama and the cowherd boys, to taste the most exquisite joys. And as they walk along the way, absorbed in herding and in play, Sri Krishna, beauty absolute, begins to blow his mystic flute. With peacock plume upon his head and fragrant flower on each ear, he enters Braja's woods with tread sublime, a dancer without peer. His golden yellow raiment glows, his garland reaches to his knees, and from his lips the nectar flows and fills his flute with melodies. As Krishna thus begins his day with friends who sing his glory sweet, he beautifies the forest way with fine impressions of his feet. Samadhi culminates in this, to always see the scene of bliss within oneself and outside too. May Krishna give this boon to you. Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol. Thank you for listening. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.